In this video, I'm going to be covering how to create a new document in Illustrator and some of the settings that we need to pay attention to whenever we are generating that new document. So Illustrator, whenever you open it up, is going to look very similar to Photoshop, right? It's got your recent files here. There's different options over here. There will probably be a pop-up box that tells you different things like, oh, you can do tutorials here, and so on and so forth. And just like in Photoshop, we're going to use this Create New button. Whenever I click that, it'll open up the New Document dialog window. And we have a couple different categories at the top of the window. Recent, saved presets that we've made, mobile, web, print, film, video, art, and illustration. We're not going to worry about using these presets right now, but they are pretty useful. And Adobe has done a really cool thing lately where they've added some templates you can use. We won't be using any of these in this class, but they can be really fun to play around with on your own time. So if I go to the Recent tab, or any of the tabs really, I can start building my own preset. And I'll cover just the important details here. Most of this is the same as Photoshop. So I'll give my preset, my document a name to start with. So I'll call this Demonstration 1. And a little bit different than Photoshop, we use points traditionally in Illustrator rather than pixels. In fact, pixels, you really won't find too many Illustrator documents with pixels. Most of them are going to use points or inches, millimeters, or centimeters. Picas is also a measurement. It's actually a really interesting type of measuring you can use. We might use this in InDesign, but for now, we're going to stick with points. And as you know, since Illustrator uses a vector-based workflow, it doesn't really matter how large our document is. Now, I might want to use, for instance, inches if I know I'm designing for a specific size. So if I know, okay, I'm designing this for an 8.5 by 11 document, then I want to use that, obviously. I might just use something like 500 by 500 points. Let's go with inches and do 8.5 by 11. That sounds good. That's a plain American piece of paper. We have the orientation here, and then we have artboards. We'll get into what artboards are a little bit later. We have something called bleed, and that's these options here. These can be turned up, and they will add a small margin onto your paper. This is used for printing. So whenever you look at a printing service, they'll typically tell you how much bleed you need on your graphics, and you can add that additional bleed here. We won't be using this in this class, but it can be really useful to know what this is. Below that, we have an advanced options button. I'm going to go ahead and click that. Now here's some really important settings. We first have a color mode. Now we've been using the RGB color mode in Photoshop. It's actually going to give us a little error here that says the chosen color mode is different from the color space defined by the document profile, blah, 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 blah. Basically, RGB is really used for screens. You might remember that from our Photoshop unit. CMYK is what's used for printing. So if I'm making this document to be printed physically, like at a printer or at a printing service, I need to have my document in CMYK. If I'm making this document for screens, so for phones, for televisions, for computer screens, I need to be in RGB color mode. Below that, I have the raster effects. Now, rastering and rasterizing is basically converting a vector into a bitmap. We're not going to be actually using this right now, so I'm just going to leave it at high. You can also change it to screen. It doesn't really matter for our class. I'll go ahead and say create, because I'm just deciding I'm making this for the screen. And we've created our new document. To save a document, I can go File, Save As, and Illustrator saves them as a .ai file. We have far less formats to save to in Illustrator than we do in Photoshop. So in this class, we're going to pretty much be using the AI format. This is the default Illustrator format. Later, I'll talk about what SVGs are and what PDFs are. Basically, those are different types of documents that you can save out. I click Save, and it's going to bring up this window. I can just leave these settings how they are, that's fine, and I'll hit OK, and we're good to go.